Okay, good afternoon, everybody. We're coming up to 4 o'clock, and in a few minutes, I'll introduce our guest for this week's Care Vision's Healthy Aging Conversation, who's the writer and broadcaster, Sally Magnusson. But before that, I'll just give you an update on 3 of the new videos that Care Visions have produced. As many who tune in know, Care Visions is a care provider supporting older people in care services and online, as well as face-to-face services. And they've produced 3 new videos in the past week, which shows the range of ways in which they're helping people to live well. So one is by the historian Philip Snow, who's written a lot about China and lives in Hong Kong. And he talks about lockdown in the East and gives you a real insight into the fact that Hong Kong isn't all just urban. He actually lives in the countryside in Hong Kong and how he lives during lockdown in Hong Kong. So that's well worth watching, a 5-minute program by the historian and writer Philip Snow. Totally differently, the second one that's gone up this week is by Dr. Charles Young, the research director of Care Visions and former BMJ, British Medical Journal, group editor. And he talks about why clinical evidence and research matter, why it's important to know that the interventions you're making to support people in their lives, in Care Vision's case, particularly their dementia care services, are well evidence-based, whether those be drug-based services or non-drug community-based services. And again, with the complete contrast, the third one, which I must admit is my favourite, is by the presenter for Care Vision, Steph McConville, who's done a programme on the life and legacy of Judy Garland. So a 10-minute intervention looking at the life of Judy Garland, who, as she points out at the beginning, isn't called Judy Garland at all, was actually born Frances Ethel Gum, but changed her name to Judy Garland actually before she was even a teenager. And we now know her, of course, for The Wizard of Oz and so many amazing programs over the years. So a real insight into life as seen by Judy Garland and the joy she's brought to so many people over the years. So it's just about 4 o'clock. I'm now delighted to invite Sally Magnusson to join us. Sally, thank you so much for joining this week on the Care Vision's Healthy Aging Conversation. We've got about half an hour to delve into your life and the thoughts you have about how people can live well as they get older, and particularly as they get dementia. Maybe a good starting point, because when we're all feeling a bit depressed by coronavirus now and again, the starting point is just to share with us your happiest moment from the past week. What's brought a smile to your face in the past week?
Well, you know, what I enjoyed most, I think, last week was a research trip I did for the novel that I'm working on at the moment. As you know, with all the restrictions, it's been very difficult in the past to leave the house. But the railways are now allowing you, with social distancing and care, to go on trips. And I went on a long 1-day trip all the way up to the Highlands of Scotland in 3 trains it took. And then I spent 2 hours at my destination, and then at a tiny little station, waited for the train and almost stuck my thumb out to the driver to stop, because it was a request stop only, and came all the way down. And just, I love trains, and it was a beautiful sunny day, and I just basked in the beauty of Scotland, and I was taking some notes, and I was thinking, and I was getting peace and quiet, and very few people on the trains actually, and it was one of these days where everything that you hope and plan works out. The trains were actually on time. I made all my connections, and it was lovely. So that was a happy day.
Oh, it's a really nice start. And as I makes me remember a visit I did I was staying at Fort Augustus just before lockdown, and we drove up to Skye and went past a tiny little station in the middle of nowhere where a train was just coming in, and it was a tiny little train in a tiny little station. Yeah. But like you, it made me feel very well connected to the wonders of trains, and I almost imagine the steam trains going up and down the line up to the north of Scotland. So very lovely memory, yes. So let's just talk a little bit about your experience understanding dementia and aging. You wrote once, and I wrote this down because I thought it was a great summary of what dementia, the challenges. You said dementia is one of the greatest social, medical, economic, scientific, philosophical and moral challenges of our times, which is pretty big statements. You know firsthand from your family experience. Just can you tell me a little bit, as you said in your book Where Memory Goes, about your experience with your mother and what that taught you about understanding people as they get older and as they develop dementia.
Yes, my mother, her maiden name was Mamie Baird. She had been a reporter, a journalist. She remained, even after she retired from journalism, she remained a great raconteur, storyteller, very witty, electric company, and just a sort of generally adorable person, but she began to show signs of going a little bit off the boil, and it became clear that she had entered this lengthy period, as it is for so many, of dementia and decline. It was eventually diagnosed as a combination of Alzheimer's disease and vascular dementia. It affected her in pretty much all the ways that you'll be familiar with if you know about dementia, but most of which took us by surprise because we were learning everything for the first time. But the way that functionality goes and everything, we had to help her with everything, and how frustrated that made her, not being able to do things for herself, not being able to express things as she wanted to and knew that she could have once. And it became progressively more difficult, but we were determined and unfortunately able to keep her at home for the whole of the time. But it became challenging in lots of ways. But one of the key things that we began to notice as we cared for my mother was that music and song was the thing that more than anything else was kind of keeping us connected to her. One of the lovely things about my mother and my mother's family actually was that they were absolutely seeped in songs. That generation, my mother was born in 1925, and she grew up at a time when there was dance hall music, there was the church choir, there was Scottish ballads, there was Hogmanay celebrations where people would just sing the night away. All these songs she had been teaching us and singing with us all her life, and as her dementia progressed, that was what we turned to more and more.
And one of the things that, going back to what I said just as we were starting, as people were coming online, the research director at Care Visions was talking about the scientific evidence that needs to lie behind good treatment and intervention. And I think I'm right in saying there's fairly strong evidence to show that actually the part of the brain that lets you connect through music often survives and functions much better than the part of the brain that affects you through speech. Is that correct?
Yes, absolutely. I mean, I find it absolutely fascinating to look into the science of music. Music resides, if that's the right word, in the deepest part of the brain cell, the part that is that regulates our eating, our sleeping, our sex drive. All the essence of our humanity is there, and in there is music, and it manifests itself in all sorts of different neurological pathways in the brain. So that if you think about all the different things that go together to make what we lump under the term of music, it's rhythm, it's beat, it's accent, it's word, if there's songs involved, and all of these are different neurological pathways. And what you see if you look at what's happening when somebody listens to music or participates in music by singing or playing a musical instrument is a sort of fireworks of connections in the brain. I mean, normally the things that we do, when we use words, there's one bit of the brain that lights up. When we do a mathematical equation, there's another bit of the brain that lights up. When you make music or listen to music, there's this great sort of conflagration of light and connection. And that is why when you have dementia, or even when you don't have dementia, the music is making connections that are essential to our sort of well-being and intrinsic to our mood and so on. But clearly, if you've got dementia and there are parts of your brain that are being eroded, which is what happens at cellular level with Alzheimer's, it is clear that what music is doing is bypassing these areas.
And as you say, Sally, that's important not just for people with dementia, but for all of us. We find a way of connecting through music and a way of enriching our lives and the way we relate to other people by music, whether that's song or orchestral music or whatever type of music. It's a way of connecting and bringing pleasure and fulfillment to people's lives. How did you? So from that experience, you then obviously saw that with your mother and saw how important it was, and then coming up to today, we've now got Playlists for Life as a thriving charity. That you tell me how that came about, because that was your inspiration really that's led to something that's transforming the lives of thousands of people every day.
Well, it was based on that experience with my mother, which became more and more intense as her dementia became more and more strong and taking over more and more parts of her being and her personality. And she described the experience of dementia to me once as like being on a long road, getting further and further away from myself. And that was a very frightening and isolating place to be on. And what we found just by trial and error was that singing with her, singing the songs, crucially the songs that she knew and could participate in, it was as if we were summoning her back from that long road. It was palpable, and at times it was almost as magical as switching on a light, so that she would be sitting there in a state of and that depression becomes something that people with dementia suffer from for reasons you can well understand. But she'd be sort of sunk there, and then you would sit down beside her and say, without even having to have a preliminary conversation, you might just go, "Mom, it's a lovely day tomorrow. Tomorrow is a lovely day." And before you had got much further than that, this big smile would come across her face, and she would begin to join in. And by the time you got to the end of the song, her mood would have lifted. And more than that, you just sensed that something had connected inside her brain. She'd connected to herself. I mean, it's why I talk about, and it was alluded to in that quote that you referred to at the beginning, that dementia is something, deeply connected to our very selves, our beings, about who we are, about our deepest humanity, about our philosophy of what we believe the self to be. All that I had access to somehow through watching my mother respond to music. And we sang her, as I often think, we sang her to death, right to her last minutes. We were singing, and it was the last thing she heard, just as the ability to respond to music is the very first thing that a baby hears in the womb. It is because the hearing sense is the last to go, we think. It was the last thing that she heard. And after she died, and I was compiling the book Where Memories Go, which is a memoir about her and her experience, and our experience trying to look after her. It's about a lot more than music. But as I was compiling that, I began to think about this musical experience. As anybody will know, when you're actually in the middle of looking after somebody with dementia, especially the very severe kind that it became with my mother, you can't think about anything apart from just getting through the next day. But afterwards, when I reflected on it, I thought, my goodness, were we onto something here?
Yes, yes.
Is this a universal phenomenon, or were we just lucky because my mum you know, liked singing, knew all these songs, and we happened to know them as well. And that's when I began to look into the science of it, and I began to look around to see if there were any areas or places, or charities, or organizations that were using music. And I came across an organization in America that was working in care homes and introducing personal music on iPods there. And I phoned this chap up. We had a long Skype conversation, and I said, I love what you're doing. I've looked into it, but you know, could you direct me to anywhere where it's being done in Britain? And he said, I've got no knowledge of anywhere where anything like that's been done in Britain, or even thought about in Britain. And I heard myself uttering the fateful words, oh, well, I suppose I'll have to do it.
And you did.
And that's what led to Playlist for Life, the charity, which was really just started in a bid to tell everybody, look, this worked for us. The science is good. It will, even if it doesn't work, it will do you no harm. Try it, because this could help transform the experience of dementia for you and your family.
So I'm getting a few questions coming in, which we'll come to in a minute. And anyone else with questions, please use the comment space on the Facebook site to add your questions. But before I come to those questions, can you just explain how it works then from an individual who goes to the Playlist for Life site? What does it help them do that otherwise they wouldn't be able to do if they're thinking about how to support their spouse or their parent who's living with dementia, who they sort of intrinsically know responds to music, but they don't quite know what to do? How does it help them go forward?
You can get advice on the website as to ways in which you might start tackling the question of what your loved one's soundtrack would be like. I mean, not everybody is in the fortunate position of knowing the tunes or the music that would strike a chord, and often when your loved one has got dementia, you can't actually ask them there and then. So we'll give advice as to how you might try pieces of music from the right kind of era. We'll give advice about the kind of questions you might ask yourself as you're looking back. You know, did your parents ever like particular kind of music on the radio, or you know, did the theme music to Coronation Street?
Right.
Or the Colgate advert, or Christmas carols, or particular hymns, or a school song, or so there's practical advice like that. There's advice about licensing. If you're in a care home, we provide training to care homes, because what gradually became clear, and this is based on a protocol that's been developed in America, it became clear that this is actually a therapeutic intervention. If you use music as part of a care home care plan, for instance, it can be offered at the times where somebody, you know, almost reliably gets upset, you know, maybe refusing to eat a meal, maybe getting frightened in the bath, as my mother did. My mother got terrified by the bath because she didn't know why we were taking our clothes off, and what are you doing? And you're not putting me in there, are you? This is a woman who you couldn't drag out of her bath in her younger years. She loved it so much. She used to compose articles in the bath. And so we would start to sing to her before she went into the bath, so that
That's
she
lovely.
would
So she felt more calm and in control.
Absolutely, and we are able to train care home staff to incorporate this into care plans, and GPs are now starting within the care homes that we have trained to suggest that this music intervention is used instead of automatic sedatives.
Right.
So that
and it is interesting, isn't it, that it can be a way of providing support that actually it's better than giving people drugs, is to find people ways of engaging. And I know Care Visions in their videos, in their dementia therapy videos, many of those include music as part of it, because it is a way of improving the quality of life. And I'm sure a number of people watching will remember the documentary you did quite a number of years ago now on Britain's secret shame, looking at the care home crisis. That's probably still there, isn't it, today? That still there's a need to look at how do we improve care home support.
Oh yes, I mean absolutely, and I think the COVID crisis has shown how much we need to pay attention to what is going on in our care homes and think much more carefully about the value we place on the lives of the folk who are in there.
But it's an encouraging message. So I think what you're saying, which makes me feel heartened, and I'm sure people watching will be heartened, is that there's something very practical you can do. You don't have to be an expert on the music from the 50s and 60s or 40s, 50s and 60s. With Playlists for Life, there's some help available to help you think about the music that may resonate with your loved one. And I loved your point, which it may be a jingle, it may be a theme tune from an advert. It doesn't need to be some great orchestral piece. Or some, it's not Beethoven's Ninth Symphony. It could be the advert for a car or for Heinz baked beans or anything.
Yes, completely. I mean, the advert for the Milky Bar Kid always gets me when I don't know which part of my childhood that is, because it's not necessarily that music, it doesn't necessarily bring even to a younger and sort of completely healthy mind, it doesn't necessarily bring, aha, I remember what I was doing when I heard that piece of music. It is something about the amygdala, that emotion producing part of the brain that the music feeds into, and it just gives you a sense of that, what that music means to you, and sort of why, without you necessarily, so I just get, I hear the Milky Bar Kid, Milky Bars are on me, that's not even musical. But
it makes you feel emotionally different.
Yes, and I'm back there, and the Virginian, the music did you ever watch the Virginian movie?
Yes.
Yeah, and that I can't remember how it goes right now, but when I hear that, I see myself right back with my siblings in front of our black and white television, and me arguing with my younger sister whether the Virginian was a sort of better fanciable bet than Trampus. I mean, we must have been all of kind of 10 and 7 at the time, but we are, right back there. And my brother, who's a very good pianist, he often, when we're all together, my siblings now, he will often sit down at the piano and just start to play these tunes from our youth, Bewitched, Lucy, all these theme tunes, and they are so potent because they came at that stage of your life, your sort of teens through to your mid-20s is the crucial time for making these memories. And of
course some of those theme tunes have lasted over the years. I mean, I'm just thinking of Doctor Who and Match of the Day, where although they've been tweaked a little bit, they're still pretty much the way they were 30-40 years ago. They're still the same theme tune. Let me just, before we come to some of the questions, because I've got quite a few people who are asking questions around sort of music and related issues, but let me just ask you to say a little bit about your book. So you published a very well-known Sealwoman's Gift, which really harked back to your Icelandic heritage in the book. But your latest book, I think, is more set in Scotland, isn't it? The Ninth Child. Just tell us a little bit about that.
The Ninth Child came out in February, just before lockdown, and it's set in the middle of the 19th century around Loch Katrine, which is the beautiful Trossachs area of Scotland, where a waterworks, a great innovative waterworks was built. In 1856 it was started, it was opened by Victoria and Albert in 1859, and it served the city of Glasgow with Highland water, taking it 30 miles into Glasgow, where it helped to beat the cholera epidemics that they were just discovering that cholera was carried in the water. It also brings in some folklore elements from nearby, because it's also on the Highland Line, and it's where there's a lot of Gaelic place names about fairies and old sort of traditional beliefs around there. So it sort of marries the social history of that time, the great engineering works of the Victorians that you can go and see to this day, with the older folklore beliefs that I've used to try and sort of explore other aspects of the human condition.
That's fantastic. I'm going to rush out and order it from Amazon straight away.
Yes.
And what are you working on at the moment? Are you onto your next book?
Yes, I'm well. I haven't got on very well with writing it. I like many writers, I hoped that lockdown would be the ideal opportunity for me just to sit down and have nothing else to do but write books all the time. And then my children came home for lockdown because we've got a house out in the country, and I had such a lovely time with them. I never lifted a pen, but I am now seriously researching the next one, which will also be set in probably also the middle to the late 19th century, and deal with other issues at the time.
Sounds good. Sounds good. We'll wait for that. But meanwhile, we shall read The Ninth Child, and I think that resonates again with me, having been up at Fort Augustus and seen the Caledonian Canal, which of course was another major feat of water engineering across the Great Glen. It's absolutely amazing to think that the work that went into creating these wonderful
hundreds and hundreds of navvies, Jeremy. That's what I'm so interested in. These men who they worked literally day and night in the most appalling conditions to make this infrastructure that we still depend on today.
Absolutely, and would probably take us decades to do today, and they often took less time to do it then, with armies of people, literally armies of navvies working, building these amazing structures. Yes,
and of course dying in the process often. Yes, an accident, no health and safety in these days. I mean,
that's true. Right, let me come to, before we run out of time, let me come to a few questions, because the number of people have written in. So Laura's written in saying her father was recently diagnosed with dementia. As a family, how did you come to terms with your mother's dementia? Is there any suggestions? Because obviously, your father, I think, before he died, your mother's dementia probably was already developing, wasn't it? I suspect, or probably early days. How did he, as a spouse, and you as the family?
Well, we didn't talk about it with him at all. I think it was kind of it was a bit unspoken, and I think we were in sort of denial. And I think what I would advise now is to talk about it as early as possible and to be as open about it, and also to be aware that yes, dementia is a horrible illness. There's no way of getting around that. But actually, it's perfectly possible to live a good life with dementia for quite a long time. And indeed, music feeds into that as one of the ways in which you can enhance somebody's well-being. So not to be too cast down and depressed by it. We had some wonderful times with my mother, and I write about that. Actually, Where Memories Go might be a helpful book to read in this context, because it shows a family sort of grappling with this and then going through the years. But I would, as almost the first thing, make a playlist for him. Sit together and talk about the music that's been part of your past and his past. Put it on a smartphone. There are not so many iPods around, but if you can find an old iPod, stick it on that. And this is what we say to people: if you can possibly get your playlist, and you can add to it, of course, as much as you like, but if you can possibly get a playlist established early on in the dementia, this can go through the dementia journey with you.
And presumably you can add to it as you go. It's not just a finite, produce it once and that's it. Because another question is, Mary has asked, if we worry about our health, what music is best for us?
Well, what I would say, the Players for Life ethos is the music that's best for you is the music that is most meaningful to you. It's not a case of, jazz is good for this and Mozart's good for something else. It's what has been meaningful and gets these connections in the brain going. But obviously there are some pieces of music, once you find that kind of playlist, there's some that you'll use to cheer a person up or to cheer yourself up, and there'll be others you might be using to calm yourself down or to calm another person down, but that's a matter, because the thing about this music thing is it is completely individual.
Yes.
It's like every single person with dementia is an individual, is precious and is special and is unique. So the music that is the soundtrack to their life is completely different from anybody else's. So it's not just a case of saying, right, I'll stick some Beethoven on, and I'll stick a bit of this on, and oh, that person was born in 1930, therefore they'd probably like it. No, it's not that, because that person could have hated that. You know, I mean,
presumably, Sally, what that makes me think is that the process of making the playlist is in itself fun and engaging for everybody. And it's, you know, so you don't have to just wait till you finish. You're just doing it, making it, thinking about it, experimenting is all part of the journey.
Exactly, and it's the same actually. If you, the person that you care for is in a care home already, it is. You can do it there as well, and it's still fun. You can do it with the staff, getting the staff involved as well, hopefully. You know, that is part, because that helps the staff of a care home to personalize and humanize this person that may seem a shadow of what they used to be. And it's very often a sadness for families that they'll think, these people looking after my mother and my father now, they'll never know what they used to be like, and how funny and vibrant and everything like that. Well, actually,
so the playlist is something you can still play today. You can still play today, the playlist for your mum.
Yes.
And it's a way of you all connecting. Can I just, I'm going to squeeze in, we're right out of time. I'm going to squeeze in the whole number of questions I haven't got to. So I'll just ask people to go to the Care Vision's YouTube site and look at some of their videos to answer some of the other questions, because a lot of them are covered there. But Ollie has written in, somebody called Ollie, who says, what insight did your mother have into her own experience? Was she aware of how she was changing, and how did she cope with the living with dementia?
She was very aware. She didn't like it being suggested to her that she had dementia. I mean, we're talking a few years ago now. I mean, she died in 2012, and you know, the campaign, Jeremy, that you and I have both been involved in, of getting dementia destigmatized and talked about as a perfectly good and natural thing to talk about, was only kind of in its infancy in that time, and she did not like the name, and she would say, I haven't, how dare you say I'm demented, she would say, you know, and we just didn't talk about it. But she knew something was wrong, and very movingly I used to see her trying to remember poems that she'd learned as a child and trying to write them down, and you know, she felt that the focus was going and things were, and it frustrated her absolutely enormously, and I think that I found hard.
Yes, I'm sure.
You know, I contented myself perhaps in the past with the thought that dementia was something that the person was just out of it. They're not.
But it's not the case. No. I mean, my own experience with my dad, I remember the thing that struck me, even when he was very near to dying, he suddenly looked at me in that times of lucidity that sometimes people with dementia have, and just looked at me and said, oh, I really hate all of this. And that was so poignant, because it sort of summed up the fact that it meant a lot to him that he couldn't do the things he wanted to do. So very similar to your experience. But then, to end on a positive note, the music is a way of connecting and bringing a bit of sunshine, really, into the lives of people who are making many other aspects of life are quite difficult. Yeah. Sally, we're going to have to stop there because we're right out of time, and we're going to get cut off any minute now. So thank you so much for being with me. We could have talked for much longer, but please, everybody, go to the Playlist for Life website, make your playlist, bring music into the life of people with dementia, and indeed of all of us, to bring some joy and happiness to the way we live and the way we support each other. Sally, thank you once again. For everybody, do read The Ninth Child is available now, and Where Memories Go, I think you can also still get, so do have a look at some of Sally's books. Next week, my guest will be Professor Subi Banerjee, who is one of the authors of a new report that came out last month looking at how do you prevent dementia. So a big study by the Lancet looking at what can be done to prevent the development of dementia. There's some really strong evidence that there's a lot more we can do now than we knew even a few years ago. So please do join me next week with Professor Subi Banerjee. Sally, once again, thank you so much, and I hope everybody has a very good week.